Chapter 1. The Message That Arrived Too Quietly. Before we begin, I want you to imagine this. Your husband ends your marriage with a text message, drains your joint account, and boards a flight with another woman, convinced he has won. But what he doesn't realize is that every word he typed would later be read out loud in court, and his quiet confidence would collapse piece by piece. I'm your host, and this is not a story about screaming or revenge taken in anger. This is a true family betrayal story about silence, preparation, and how one calm decision changed everything. The last customer left just before closing, the soft chime of the door fading into the quiet of the shop. I wrapped the silk scarf the way I always did, slow and careful, smoothing the paper, folding the ribbon just right. She was a regular, a woman in her late 60s who came in every few months and always told me the same story about her daughter living back east. I listened, nodded, smiled. When she left, I stood for a moment behind the counter, hands resting on the wood, letting the silence settle. The boutique was calm in the way it always was at the end of the day. The lights were warm, the racks tidy, the faint scent of lavender from the diffuser near the window. Outside, the street in northwest Portland was already starting to dim, cars passing slower now, people heading home. I reached for my coat, checking the clock out of habit, 6:48, right on time. That was when my phone vibrated in my pocket. I did not rush to check it. I never did. Years of running a small business had trained me to finish what I was doing before responding to anything else. I turned off the register, slid the day's receipts into the drawer, and locked the cabinet beneath the counter. Only then did I take out my phone and glance at the screen. It was a text message from Mark Ellison. No greeting, no preamble, just a block of words that seemed oddly formal, like something he had rehearsed. He wrote that he was leaving the marriage, that he had already moved money out of our joint account, that he did not want drama or long conversations. He said this was the best decision for him and that I would eventually understand. At the end, there was a line that landed heavier than the rest. Something about me being strong and how I would be fine on my own, as if that settled everything. I read it once, then again. I waited for my hands to shake, for my chest to tighten, for the familiar rush of heat behind my eyes that usually came when something went wrong. None of that happened. My body felt strangely still, like it had gone quiet all at once. I became aware of the weight of the phone in my palm, the hum of the lights above me, the sound of my own breathing. I did not type a response. I put the phone back in my pocket and finished closing the shop. I turned off the lights one by one, checked the back room, and locked the front door. The metal clicked into place the same way it always had. I stood there for a moment, with my hand still on the lock, staring at my reflection in the glass. I looked normal. Tired, maybe, but normal. Anyone passing by would have thought it was just another evening. Walking to my car, I noticed small things I usually ignored. The way the air felt cooler than it had earlier, the sound of someone laughing a block away, a leaf skittering across the sidewalk. My chest felt heavy now, not sharp, just heavy, like something had settled there and refused to move. At home, I set my keys on the counter and hung up my coat. The apartment was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel louder than it should. I poured a glass of water and drank it standing up, then sat at the kitchen table without turning on the television or the radio. I took out my phone again and read the message one more time, slower this time, paying attention to the wording. It was not just that he was leaving, it was the certainty in his tone, the way he framed it as a decision already completed, a door already closed. There was no space in his words for my response, no invitation to speak. It felt less like a conversation and more like a notice. I still did not reply. Instead, I set the phone face down on the table and sat there until the light outside faded completely. I noticed the physical sensations then, the tightness across my shoulders, the dull pressure behind my sternum. It was not panic, it was more like my body was bracing itself instinctively for something it could not yet name. The phone vibrated again. I did not pick it up right away. I watched it buzz against the wood, the screen lighting up, then going dark. When it stopped, I turned it over and unlocked it. Another message from Mark. This one was shorter, almost casual. He mentioned that he had used the joint credit card to book his flight and hotel, said it offhandedly, like it was a minor detail not worth discussing. There was even a hint of pride in the way he wrote it, as if he expected me to be impressed by the decisiveness of it all. I read that message 3 times. This one felt different. The first message had been about leaving, about emotion, or the absence of it. This one was about logistics, about money, about timing. It was specific in the way the first had not been. Dates implied, charges made, a paper trail I could almost see behind his words. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment. The heaviness in my chest shifted, settling lower, steadier. A thought surfaced, quiet but clear. He had not been as careful as he thought. I picked up the phone again, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. For a second, I considered responding, asking questions, demanding explanations. The urge passed as quickly as it came. There would be time for questions later if I wanted them answered at all. I set the phone down once more and stood up. I rinsed my glass, wiped the counter, and went through the motions of my evening routine. I changed clothes, fed the cat, checked the locks on the doors. Everything was ordinary, almost deliberately so. Each small action grounded me, kept me from drifting too far into what-ifs and maybes. When I finally lay down, the messages replayed in my mind, not as a rush of emotion, but as pieces of information. Words chosen, details revealed. I realized I was not rereading them to relive the hurt. I was rereading them to understand what they showed. The apartment was dark and quiet, and somewhere in that stillness, I felt a shift. Not relief, not resolve, just a pause, a moment suspended, as if everything had taken a breath and was waiting to see what would happen next. Chapter 2. What I had been preparing for without admitting it. The pause did not end when I fell asleep. It followed me into the next morning and settled over the days that came after, stretching backward as much as forward. In the quiet that followed his messages, memories I had ignored for months began to line up in my mind, no longer scattered, no longer easy to dismiss. 2 months earlier, I had been standing in the kitchen of our townhouse in Evanston, watching Daniel Brooks tighten his tie in the mirror by the door. He told me he was flying to Denver for a 2-day operations meeting. He said it casually, the way he always did, already half out the door. Later that night, when I checked our shared calendar to confirm a delivery window for the shop, I noticed something small. The meeting he mentioned was listed as 1 day, not 2. I remember thinking I must have misheard him. I did not say anything. A week after that, a credit card alert came through on my phone while I was sorting inventory at the boutique in Lincoln Park. It was a charge for a hotel stay in St. Louis. I knew the chain. It was one he had used before. The amount was unremarkable, not large enough to raise alarms, but the date was odd. He had told me he would be home that night. When I asked him about it later, he smiled and said the trip had changed last minute. He said I worry too much. I believed him. Or maybe it is more honest to say I wanted to. Over the next few weeks, the pattern repeated itself in quiet ways. Same hotel brand, different cities. Short stays that never matched his stories exactly. When I walked into the room, he would turn his phone face down without realizing he was doing it. When it buzzed, he would glance at the screen before answering, his body angling away from me as if by instinct. None of it screamed betrayal, not yet. It whispered it. I did not think about divorce then. I did not imagine myself alone or picture what life would look like without him. What I felt was unease, the kind that creeps in slowly and makes you second-guess your own instincts. So I did what I have always done when something feels off. I prepared. I opened a new checking account at a different bank near my shop. It was not dramatic. I did not hide it. I simply redirected my personal savings there, money I had earned from the boutique long before Daniel and I ever merged finances. I told myself it was practical, that it made sense to keep business and personal funds clean, which was true. I gathered documents I had not looked at in years, the deed to the townhouse, still in my name, the original lease and later purchase agreement for the boutique space, tax returns, quarterly reports, vendor contracts. I scanned copies and stored them on a secure drive, labeling each folder carefully. It felt methodical, almost boring, and that was comforting. At the time, I told myself I was being cautious, not suspicious. Women are taught early to soften their language, even in their own heads. We protect ourselves quietly, so we do not look ungrateful or paranoid. The first call from his mother came a few days after the message that ended everything. Margaret Brooks was 70 and had never raised her voice at me. When I answered, her tone was gentle, concerned. She asked how I was holding up. She said Daniel had called her and told her things were complicated, that he needed space, that we had grown apart. I let her talk. When she paused, she asked if we thought we could work things out. She reminded me how long Daniel and I had been together, how marriage took effort, how men sometimes struggled to express themselves. The words were familiar. I had heard versions of them my whole life. I told her I understood. I did not argue. I did not explain my side. I thanked her for checking in and said I needed some time. When the call ended, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the wall, not angry, just tired. That was the hardest part to admit. I was tired of being the steady one, the reasonable one, the person expected to absorb disruption so others could feel comfortable. Later that evening, I opened my phone and read Daniel's messages again, not the way I had the first night, searching for emotion, for meaning. This time, I read them like records. I noted the timestamps, the sequence, the phrasing. In the second message, the one about the credit card, he mentioned the booking as if it were an afterthought, a simple fact. Flight and hotel, already done. No question marks, no hesitation. I realized then that he had done more than leave. He had documented his own actions without meaning to. Dates, intent, use of shared resources. He had written it all down for me. I did not feel triumphant. I felt calm. I did not reply. I did not forward the messages to anyone. I did not call a lawyer yet. I only made one decision that night. I would not delete a single word he sent me. As I plugged my phone into the charger and turned off the light, the unease I had carried for months finally took shape. It was no longer just a feeling. It was information. And once something becomes information, it can be understood, organized, and eventually used. I lay in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the next room, aware that whatever came next would not be driven by impulse. It would come from what I already knew and what he, unknowingly, gave me. Chapter 3. The first time he realized I wasn't panicking. Morning came without drama. No alarms, no rushing. I woke to the gray light slipping through the blinds and lay there for a few seconds, listening to the house breathe. It felt strange to know that something had already changed, while everything around me looked exactly the same. I made coffee, fed the cat, and sat at the kitchen table with my phone face down beside my mug. I did not need to look at it to know it would light up soon. By 8:15, it did. The first message was short. "Did you do something to the card?" I read it once and set the phone back down. 10 minutes later, another vibration. "My flight isn't going through. The airline says there's an issue." Then another. "The hotel says my reservation isn't confirmed. What's going on?" The shift in his tone was subtle but unmistakable. Gone was the certainty from the night before. These messages were clipped, edged with confusion. I could picture him standing somewhere unfamiliar, phone in hand, trying to keep his voice steady. I did not respond. I rinsed my mug and set it in the sink. I changed clothes, pulling on a sweater and jeans, moving slowly, deliberately. When I finally picked up my phone again, there were 3 more messages waiting. This isn't funny. Call me. Evelyn, please. That was the first time he used my name since he told me he was leaving. I took a breath and opened my contacts. I scrolled past his name and stopped at another, Nora Blake. I had met her years earlier through a vendor dispute for the boutique. She was practical, direct, and never wasted words. When she answered, her voice was calm. "Good morning, Evelyn. What's going on?" I told her exactly what had happened, not how it felt, just what was said and when. I read the messages out loud, word for word, including the second one about the credit card. There was a pause on the line when I finished. "Do you still have the messages?" she asked. "Yes." "Don't delete anything," she said. "Email them to me as screenshots right now." I did, attaching each image carefully, making sure the timestamps were visible. While I waited for her to open them, my phone buzzed again. Daniel was still messaging. "Why aren't you answering me?" I ignored it. When Nora came back on the line, her tone had shifted slightly, sharper, more focused. "You are the primary cardholder on that account," she said. "Daniel is listed as an authorized user. That means the bank sees you as the owner." "What does that mean for what he did?" I asked. "It means using the card for a personal trip, especially after telling you he was leaving, can be considered outside of the scope of authorized use," she said, "especially if there's a dispute involved." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting that settle. "So I didn't imagine it," I said. "No," she replied, "you didn't." She explained what my options were, slowly and clearly, how to flag the charges, how to document everything, what not to do yet. She did not talk about court or motions or anything that felt big. Not yet. This was still about control, about setting boundaries before things escalated. "Do not respond emotionally," she said, "and do not tip him off about what you're doing." I promised her I wouldn't. After we hung up, I sat in my car outside the shop for a few minutes, watching people walk past with their coffees and briefcases. Life was continuing at its usual pace. Somewhere, Daniel was realizing that things were not unfolding the way he had planned. Inside the boutique, I unlocked the door and turned on the lights. The morning passed in a blur of small tasks, answering emails, checking inventory, greeting customers. Every so often, my phone would buzz in my pocket, a reminder that another conversation was happening somewhere else, one I was choosing not to join. Around noon, I checked my messages. There was a long one waiting. "Look, I don't know what's happening, but this is serious. I'm stuck here and nothing is working. You need to call me. We can talk this out. Please." I read it twice. This message was different from the others. It was not angry. It was not dismissive. It was afraid. I did not reply. Instead, I forwarded the message to Nora and added it to the same folder where I had saved the rest. Each one felt less like a personal attack now and more like a record, a trail he was laying down without realizing it. Later that afternoon, I heard about Leela without hearing from her directly. A mutual acquaintance from one of Daniel's work events had stopped by the shop. She mentioned casually that Daniel's trip seemed chaotic, that his companion looked stressed. She did not use names. She did not need to. I nodded and changed the subject. I did not feel anger toward the woman he was with. I felt distance. Whatever promises he had made to her were already unraveling under the weight of reality. That was not my doing. It was his. By early evening, the messages slowed. One final text came through just after 6. "I didn't think you'd do this." I almost smiled at that, not because it was funny, but because it was revealing. He still believed this was something I was doing to him, not something set in motion by his own choices. I set my phone down and locked up the shop. As I walked to my car, the air felt cooler than it had that morning. The city hummed around me, indifferent and steady. I realized then that he had expected panic, tears, pleas. He had expected me to chase after him, to ask questions, to negotiate. Instead, I had given him silence, and for the first time, that silence had unsettled him. At home, I placed my phone on the nightstand and turned off the light. I did not know exactly how far this would go or what it would become. I only knew that the balance had shifted. He was no longer certain, and I was no longer reacting. Chapter 4. When everything moved from personal to legal. The shift from private to formal happened quietly, without a single dramatic moment to announce it. One day it was just messages on my phone and a growing file on my laptop. The next, my life was being translated into documents with headers and signatures, and I was no longer reacting. I was watching something larger begin to move. Nora called me early the following morning. "I filed the emergency motion," she said. "The court granted a temporary hearing." Her voice was steady, almost neutral, the way professionals sound when they have done this many times before. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee untouched, listening as she explained what would happen next. "They will freeze any remaining shared assets until the judge reviews the transactions," she continued. "Daniel will be required to explain the charges. We are not arguing emotion here. We are presenting facts." "I understand," I said. "You do not need to speak unless asked," she added. "Let the paperwork do the talking." I thanked her and hung up, feeling an unexpected sense of relief. Not happiness, not victory, just relief. The kind that comes when you realize you are no longer alone in carrying the weight of something. At the shop, Helen Price was already there when I arrived. She had worked with me for years and knew my routines well enough to sense when something was off. That morning, she did not ask questions. She simply handed me a clipboard and asked which deliveries she should prioritize. "I can take care of the rest today," she said. "You do what you need to do." I nodded, grateful for the simplicity of her support. The boutique ran the way it always did. Customers came and went, the register opened and closed, fabric was folded, orders were placed. The world did not stop because my marriage was unraveling, and in a strange way, that steadiness anchored me. My phone stayed silent for most of the day. Daniel did not message. I wondered if someone had finally told him to stop. That afternoon, Robert Ellison called. Daniel's father had never been a man of many words. He had spent decades as an accountant and approached most things with numbers first, feelings second. When I answered, he did not ask how I was. "I've been looking over some things," he said. "Daniel mentioned the account issues. I wanted to understand what happened." I did not argue. I did not defend myself. "I have records," I said, "if you want to see them." There was a pause on the line. "Yes," he said, "that would be helpful." I emailed him the same summaries I had already sent Nora. Dates, amounts, account names, no commentary, no conclusions. When we hung up, I felt something ease inside me, not because he believed me yet, but because the conversation had finally shifted away from character and toward evidence. The hearing took place 2 days later in a small courtroom downtown. The building was older than I expected, its hallways quiet, the air cool and faintly antiseptic. I sat beside Nora at a narrow table, hands folded in my lap, listening as she arranged the files in front of her. Daniel arrived late. I did not look at him until he sat down across the room. He looked smaller than I remembered, his confidence dulled, his movements unsure. When his eyes met mine, he opened his mouth as if to speak. I looked away. The judge entered without ceremony. There was no grand speech, no sense of spectacle, just a man in a black robe taking his seat and opening a folder. Nora stood when it was time to speak. "We are requesting temporary orders to maintain the status quo," she said. "This includes freezing joint assets and reviewing recent credit transactions." The judge nodded and turned his attention to Daniel. "Mr. Ellison, do you dispute the charges listed here?" Daniel shifted in his chair. "I used the card. Yes." The judge lifted a page from the file. "This message," he read aloud, "was sent by you on the evening of your departure. You state that you booked a flight and hotel using the joint credit account." The room felt very still. I could hear the hum of the lights above us. Daniel did not respond right away. "Yes," he said finally. The judge made a note. "For the purpose of this hearing, the court will issue temporary orders freezing remaining joint assets pending further review." That was it. No lecture, no judgment beyond what the paperwork allowed, just a decision grounded in what was written down. When we stepped back into the hallway, Daniel tried to approach me. "Evelyn," he said, his voice low, "we need to talk." Nora stepped slightly in front of me. "Any communication should go through counsel," she said. Daniel looked at her, then back at me. I did not meet his gaze. Outside, the air felt brighter, sharper. I took a breath and let it out slowly. That evening, I returned to the shop. Helen left a note on the counter listing what had sold and what needed to restock. I read it, smiled faintly, and set it aside. The normalcy of it all felt almost surreal. My phone buzzed once later that night, a message from Margaret. It was brief. "I understand more now. I hope you are taking care of yourself." I did not respond immediately. I sat on the couch and let the quiet settle around me, the events of the day replaying not as a storm, but as a sequence, a process, something that had begun to unfold on its own momentum. When I finally turned off the lights and lay down, I felt a kind of calm I hadn't known in months, not because everything was resolved, not because the outcome was certain, but because I no longer had to explain myself. The system had taken over, and for the first time since Daniel left, I allowed myself to rest in that pause, knowing that the next phase would come soon enough. Chapter 5. What He Lost and What I Kept. The days after the hearing unfolded without noise. No sudden calls, no dramatic confrontations, just a quiet reordering of things that had already begun to shift. The court papers arrived first, plain envelopes with my name printed neatly on the front. Temporary orders, access restricted, accounts reviewed. Each page confirmed what had already been set in motion. Daniel did not contact me directly again. What I heard instead came through other channels: a brief email from his attorney, a forwarded notice about an account change, once a message from a mutual acquaintance asking if everything was all right. I replied politely and vaguely, the way people do when they have moved past the need to explain. Lila disappeared from the picture without a word. No apology, no accusation. I imagined her packing a suitcase somewhere, realizing that whatever version of him she had been promised was not the one standing in front of her now. I did not feel satisfaction at that, only distance. Her silence felt like the final confirmation that this chapter was closing on its own. My phone rang one evening while I was closing the shop. The number belonged to Robert Ellison. "I went through the statements," he said. His voice was measured, careful. "I see what happened." I thanked him. That was all. He did not ask for forgiveness on his son's behalf. He did not defend him either. The conversation stayed where it belonged, on facts, not feelings. When we hung up, I felt lighter than I had after any argument. Margaret sent a short message a week later. "I hope you are well," she wrote. "I didn't understand before." I read it once and set the phone down. I did not reply immediately, not because I was angry, but because I no longer felt responsible for managing anyone else's comfort. Work became the steady rhythm that carried me forward. Helen and I sat down one morning and mapped out plans for the online store. Nothing ambitious, just a cleaner checkout process, better photos, a more consistent shipping schedule. Orders began to come in from outside the city, small numbers at first, then more. It felt good to build something quietly, without the pressure of proving anything to anyone. At home, the townhouse felt different. Not empty, just mine. I rearranged the living room, moving the armchair closer to the window, clearing a shelf that had held things we never really used. Each change was small, almost insignificant on its own. Together, they added up to space. Daniel's name surfaced occasionally, usually in updates from attorneys or paperwork that needed signatures. He never appeared in person. When I thought about him, it was not with anger, but with a kind of detached clarity. I saw the choices he had made, how confidently he had made them, and how quickly that confidence had evaporated when consequences appeared. A few months passed. One afternoon, I sat on the floor of the shop after closing, sorting through a box of old receipts I'd kept out of habit more than necessity. The light was fading outside, the same way it had on the night everything began. I realized then how different my body felt. The tightness in my chest was gone. My shoulders no longer carried that constant weight. I was tired sometimes, yes, but it was the normal tiredness that came from work and life, not the exhaustion of holding things together for someone else. I did not feel triumphant. I felt steady. People sometimes imagine revenge as something loud, a confrontation, a final speech. What I learned instead was that real revenge often looks like safety, like knowing where your money is, like sleeping through the night without checking your phone, like realizing that someone else's poor decisions no longer have the power to destabilize your life. Daniel lost access to the things he assumed would always be there: the accounts, the leverage, the certainty that I would clean up after him. I kept my home, my work, my sense of self. More importantly, I kept my silence when it mattered and my voice when it counted. One evening, as I locked the shop and stepped out onto the sidewalk, I caught my reflection in the glass. I looked older than I had a year ago, but I also looked more present, more anchored, like someone who knew where she stood. Before I went home, I sat in my car for a moment, engine off, listening to the city settle into night. I thought about how easily things can change and how often we ignore the small signs until they pile up into something impossible to overlook. If you are listening to this and something in your life feels off, not explosive, just quietly wrong, I hope you hear this part clearly. Preparation is not betrayal. Protecting yourself is not cruelty. And waiting until things fall apart is not a requirement for choosing yourself. What would you do differently if you trusted your instincts a little sooner?